So there's been a lot of complaining lately about Battlebots Season 6, or to longtime fans, Season 11. We'll just go by Season 6 for now, because reboot Season 6. Complaints vary from filler to flaky rule enforcement to poor fight qualities. It practically seems to span every area of the show, besides the fact that it still exists. There's just been many complaints. It all came to a climax in Episode 11, especially when tournament fights got highlighted and left off the episode, while being spoiled in the episode itself, making the later uploads meaningless to non-Facebook supporters. Well, it got me wondering if things are really as bad as they are, or it's something else. Viewers getting spoiled, small problems blown out of proportion, issues at filming due to external circumstances, poor production choices, etc. I decided to look at 3 categories of complaints: changes to the box, cupcake fights, and filler content. Changes to the box causing early controversy amongst builders and fans, cupcake fights demonstrating production teams gaming the competition too much, and filler content being the largest of the problems with wasting time for fights. That's not to say that other pieces weren't valid concerns to me, just stuff like rule enforcement or short main events are a bit too subjective and opinions vary too wildly. From the start of the season, many people were already unhappy about the box changes. The big one, of course, being the upper deck, also now known as
the Ono Plateau, man!
People were not happy about this. It's pretty well known within the community at this point that due to the combination of physics and the design's maneuverability, four-wheel drive vertical spinners are basically the meta. Ever since Tombstone won the second reboot season, every championship was taken by a 4WD vert. The deck reduced the usable area of the arena, making it harder for horizontal spinners to prepare with their weapons, and giving control types blind spots when they need to be precise. Indeed, right from the beginning we saw Gigabyte get screwed by the corner traps, until eventually even the show admitted the obstruction.
Well, I think this is one of those teams that actually has been hurt by the new geometry of the battle box and those dangerous short corners.
It did give us some memorable moments, but overall reinforcing the meta and not allowing builders to prepare and strategize for it are quite bad. In terms of measurable effect, someone on Reddit did the math. They found a 21.7 reduction in the average distance to the wall. From the numbers alone, it appeared like control bots would benefit the most, as with the design intention, and we did sometimes see that. Though one could also argue that such moves in the past would be an out-of-arena knockout, so it actually takes away from control bots. Which, yeah, most of that was taken away because of another addition, the sneeze guards. I would argue though that just as bad would be widening the kill saw slots. About the kill saws, in the olden days they were an absolute essential part of the show, when robots, even the champion, constantly failed and couldn't do anything damaging, and especially when lighter weight classes would just be thrown around in the most entertaining fashion. Nowadays, because the game show rules and modern weaponry advancing so much, it's hard to think of a time they even appeared, let alone have any effect on the matches. Except when they're just a hole in the floor. I could talk about Hydra driving around them or Lockjaw getting their forks stuck in there, but this ruined a fight between two over-the-top meta-breaking robots. Let me just take a moment here to say that Deep 6 is absolutely one of my favorites. It's so over-the-top you never bet on it to win, but it's just hype because you never know what happens with it. Ultimately, carnage to itself or the opponent, or both. But kill saw slots. What hurts the most is that the builders were not told it got widened, even though Deep 6 even widened their stabilizers this season. On top of that, the reasoning, it was widened to add pre-fight effects. Showmanship and spectacle. More on that later. I did hear an argument that, this kind of breaks the fork meta, but there's better ways of doing that than just getting robots stuck in there, like adding lips or bumps into the arena. As the season went on, it became more and more apparent there were a lot of cupcake fights. This seems to be the term for the selection committee creating a matchup that heavily favors one side, usually a fan favorite, and hoping to buffer the record with that. There's a concept of strength of schedule that is designed to counter that, but sometimes that just seems to be in name only.
They gave Blip Rusty and Overhaul to fight in its first 2 fights. Basically 2 of the weakest robots they could have possibly fought. They got a 7th seed out of that somehow.
All in all, it just feels like producers are setting the table for certain competitors to have success because they're fan favorites and people come to see them. Mad Catter is a fan favorite as Mark Mason is highly entertaining, and Witch Doctor is a popular team that's also a great ambassador for the sport, and I think they're both really great. but it's clear they got some questionable matchups once their records became iffy. Witch Doctors is particularly egregious.
I don't know what happened there.
What is this draw? Why? Why?
So there's two
one made
things.
me sad.
Three
I mean,
things.
I'm gonna sound terrible. This is gifting Witch Doctor a win. I love Rusty, but this is making them 2-1. Heartbreaking on them too. She's like, I don't want to fight Rusty.
I didn't really see it until Mr. Psycho brought it up, but Hydra, the appointed new villain of Battlebots, a major character of the show, also had some questionable stuff surrounding it.
Teams were told by the referees they could not wait for a countout, they had to attack again. And yet in this fight, Hydra spent more than 30 seconds avoiding a robot that was trying to engage with them, avoiding a fight, and being rewarded with a KO victory as a result when other teams were told they weren't allowed to do that. That's what pisses me off about this fight so much.
Super interesting consider they are respectively a former finalist and a number 1 seed. Then, Witch Doctor is involved in weird production shenanigans again. Which, is it a sport, was a question asked.
To me, again, is this a sport or what? Because you don't just replace the number 9 seed with the number 35 seed in the NCAA tournament. I personally dislike it if we're trying to be taken seriously as a competitive sport and not just a spectacle on TV. These are the moments where you have to make the tough decision.
I think people understand it's a TV show, and TV shows need to bring in money and sponsors, or it can't really happen at the scale that it does. But when the competition aspect is so influenced by the need to bring in viewers, then yes, it'll be seen as a game show, and still, more on that later. Back on the subject of cupcakes though, I decided to compare it to what seems like the holy grail of the reboots, the first Discovery season. I took a look at the first few fight cards before the tournament, as those had tournament implications, and if cupcakes were being handed out to force certain competitors into the bracket, it'll be here. I don't want to be too opinionated in the discussion myself, although I have my opinions. Instead, I'll let viewer polls determine what are cupcake fights. Some of them are just obvious based on the matchup, whether a team is struggling that year or rookie, etc. And to be fair, planning a cupcake fight from the production committee standpoint is basically a prediction anyway. So for 2018, here are the 3 fight cards I took a look at. There's certainly some that seem to be a mismatch at first glance. Now, here are the poll results. Arbitrarily, I'll say 2080 is a big enough gap that people think one robot will win handily, so we see 2 such fights, 4 if we stretch it to 3070. Now let's take a look at 2021's fight cards. To be fair, there's a greater amount of fights overall, but we see a whopping 10 lopsided predictions in here. That's not even accounting for 3070. So accounting for the higher number of fights, let's look at percentages. In Season 3 we get 13%, and this season we get 41%, a much higher ratio. But more interestingly, let's look at those cupcake fights and who they were, particularly the super lopsided ones. So in Season 3 we have Monsoon and Warhead. They were the super cupcakes. Warhead didn't make the bracket, so Monsoon was the only one with postseason implications. For 2021, we have Riptide, Valkyrie, Black Dragon, Tombstone, Shredderator, Ribot, Bloodsport, Madcatter, Huge, Witch Doctor. They all made the bracket. So every cupcake fight was one with tournament implications. What's more important though is that Monsoon in 2018 was a rookie bot. In the 2021 poll, we have the most destructive winner, a former champ, a former finalist, a number 2 seed. It's nuts to give them so much benefit of the doubt. On top of cupcakes though, because of production issues, fights were dropped and some teams got 2 fights instead of 3. A number of the cupcake fights, such as Tombstone and Witch Doctor, were 3rd fights to get them into the tournament with a 2-1 record. Other robots like Hypershock and Shatter were 2-0 and denied a 3rd fight. But
Must have affected you a little bit, kind of thinking that we didn't get the full quota.
I think, our first reaction was that we were extremely angry, and that was also probably our second and third reaction. I think get your money worth is kind of right. We have sponsors who are giving us money, and we want them to get their money's worth in TV time. Secondly, is we use the fights to test things. You think you're going to get 3 regular season fights, you win your first 2, that gives your 3rd fight like a great sort of low risk way to test. You win, you get a higher seed, you lose, you're still in the tournament, so you can test something. You knew how many sessions you had, you knew how many episodes you had. It wasn't like there were ever going to be 20 more fights available. Like, that was how many there were. You matched the wrong people against each other that ended up with the wrong fight records, and then now we're paying the price. I think they thought of it like a buy. You know, I don't think they thought of it like that. Like, they're giving us a buy week, and we should be happy. Like, but we want to be on TV.
The email we got specifically said, congratulations.
And having at least a minimum of 3 opportunities to make it to TV is, I think, really important for the show. Whatever the number is, everybody, like, I do think should have the same number of fights, and that's kind of where it's kind of like it's double-edged sword for everybody, right? Like, you have less damage, you have less opportunities to go and prove yourself to the selection committee, but that from my perspective, I was a bit disappointed because it feels more gamey than like less of a sport when people all don't have the same preseason.
This is a hard balance to strike because winners want to be rewarded with more airtime and chances to weed out weaknesses or improve their seed. But you could say that one-win teams need more data to determine who actually makes the bracket. But presumably you had those on the brink do battle, rather than hand them free wins to control who gets in. Or better yet, fight the 2-0 competitors and see just how strong they really are. Okay, that went a bit long. It's pretty clear that matchups got much more questionable as the seasons went on. Time to move on. Probably one of the biggest complaints about the season amongst viewers is that there's too much filler. Too much filler, but fights are cut from the episode. Too much filler and it's just dumb shit. Too much filler and the tech segments we asked for with Pete are bad. So again, I went and looked at the Holy Grail Reboot season's first bracket episode and compared it to this season's. What I did was go through both of the episodes and see how much time were spent on the context of pre-fights, fights, post-fights, color segments, and highlighted fights. The rest of the stuff I didn't time are soon to be not fight related or just generic hype pieces. What I found was that a whopping 34 minutes of episode 11 was spent on pre-fight content, recaps, button pressing, etc, etc. Then post-fight content such as interviews and replays made up almost 20 minutes. The actual fighting came in third at 15 minutes. A lot of fan anger was directed at pre-fight rituals, and rightly so. Most of the episode is spent there. So I break it down further and time the pre-fights individually. Then I looked at the subsections of the median time, because the median is least likely to have aberrations from cold opens or random segments. This came out to be comparing Minotaur vs. Monsoon in Season 3 episode 18 to Minotaur vs. Bloodsport in Season 6 episode 11. And here are how those two played out. This one actually had no button presses and instead swapped that out for an ad break, but the slot's about the same, we could assume. We can clearly see most of the bloat comes from the walk-ins and the ready state. For the walk-ins, I think it is worthy to note that this is where Kenny sometimes gives technical information provided by Pete, so it's not completely without value in terms of robotics and just about hype.
They call this weapon the Club Sandwich. It's aluminum sandwiched by AR steel.
However, the large bloat in the ready state with the button pressing, ad break, and fight chance, that is a bit much. We don't need to work out percentages to see that. Overall though, the percentages of the entire episode work out pretty similar. We actually got more post-fight bloat as a percentage of the total episode, but the complete idle time is the most bothering. After all, the generic chanting is generic. The focus type packages still exist, though, from Season 3 to Season 6. Let's say we take the total pre-fight times and divide out to find out how much additional time we lose, compared to if pre-fights in Season 6 were as long as in Season 3. Given that by average we lose 76 seconds per fight, we lose a total of 8 minutes 52 seconds overall in the episode over 7 fights, versus if we kept the average pre-fight hype time to around 3 minutes 30 seconds. That's pretty darn close to being able to include the cut fights, actually. If we assume people want to see the tournament and take out the play-in fights, we absolutely would have time to show all the fights then.
But I completely get your point. Like, you know, at the end of the day, like, we're here to see the top 32, not the 32 playing or the like highlight that fight and kind of like say, hey, look, this happened earlier because they had a play-in for it, but here's the result.
And this is just with reducing the hype packages to how they were before, not removing them completely. Because, yes, to make TV, some filler is needed. So where else can fat be trimmed? Interviews make up a hefty chunk of pre- and post-fight. I would argue not every fight requires them. Let's talk about pre-fight. As Team Hypershock indicated on one of their blog posts, most strategies are non-committal and come down to builders using the robot as they were designed for, and while avoiding the opponent's weaponry. That or re-emphasizing why it's important to win.
No doubt he's going to try to get under us because it's this whole thing. We have to do our darndest to make sure that doesn't happen.
We're going to try and ram directly into their weapon, try and break it.
For try getting cleanly underneath them and hopefully avoid on any hits from that big angry vertical spinner.
This is really an important fight. We can't go 0-2.
We're going to have to not just win the match, but look good doing it, because we're going to have to justify that a 1-2 team deserves to be in the top 32.
This is mostly redundant, and I think Chris and Kenny do a good job of setting the stakes already. So we move to the post-fight. This is where I think Chris and Kenny are a bit more on the detrimental side, because as indeed, things often boil down to, do you think you can win?
Now you'll go in probably somewhere middle of the pack. Do you think you can shock the world?
Yeah.
And you've only had a minute's worth of fight in Battlebots, but are you a contender? Andrea, you are a fan favorite. Your fans want to know, is this a robot that can win the giant nuts?
But we also get some of the most personality out of the teams here, which makes them more endearing.
The fun and the entertainment.
You bet, man. See you next time.
How about if you get a top 10 seed? You'll dye your hair in the round of 32.
I'm the villain, baby. You gotta hate me. He deserves an award, being the most hated man on television at a time when Donald Trump was on television.
So overall, I'd say it's hard to justify cutting these off. Maybe just trim it down to the good bits. Now for the talk bloats. This mostly revolves around Pete, the bot whisperer's contributions, as it includes the technical pieces that he gives tips to Kenny for during walkouts, which as we saw is part of the pre-fight bloat. People have pointed out that not all the pieces are very good, but we also do get some really nice ones. And one must remember these parts sometimes have to gear to lame and casual audiences as well. Fans and builders have long been clamoring for technical info about the bots though.
I've been really happy because all the builders have really said it's been a huge boon to the show. The builders have really enjoyed it. So if I'm making them happy, that's the most important, because that's sort of what I want to do, is I want to represent the community. I'm trying to represent the builders and talk in a way that they talk and explain that to everyone else.
And as he goes in the pits and gathers information, I'd argue he could be leveraged more for pit footage. Technical information in the pits also includes segments, and in Season 6 we actually got some really good segments that addressed things like the meta or the ground game fight, rather than just color pieces for personality. And also, Pete is just excited to talk about the robots, and that energy to me is great for the show.
This is pretty damn close to a dream job. I mean, it's pretty hard to beat.
It's also reflecting Chris and Kenny, as they seem to love what they do, and fans seem to appreciate them quite a bit. Which is to say, I have no problem with the three. Farouk's intros are probably the most scripted and least relevant for context, but they are not really all that long and add some tacky fun to the show, and lots of personality. Some do run on a bit, and in general, I just don't think it's a big issue. Like, here's one that was pretty long, but also interesting.
I was thinking, this team name has end at the beginning. Seems backwards, but it kind of explains how they're winning. They're endearing, but their opponents are endangered, that's for sure. Face them and there's an endless amount of pain to endure. If you endeavor to fight them, I can't endorse that thought, because Endgame has ended every enemy they fought. Give it up for Endgame!
I mean, compare all these new styles of segments to the kind of stuff that got in the Comedy Central days and arguably got the show cancelled, and I think it's quite an improvement. And by the way, you may have caught earlier, Season 3 actually had a highlighted fight of its own, so highlighting fights is nothing new. Not saying that's great, but it's not a surefire indicator that the show's going downhill. And I will concede that if the hype package idle time is as long as the fight itself, that's not exactly great. To wrap up this section though, it really is a balance. There's a lot of bloat and non-fight content, but a lot of it adds color and personality for fans and casuals alike. The common argument against trimming it down is that it needs to have color and personality, but earlier seasons packaged that more efficiently, and using the format of earlier seasons, it seems possible to make room for more fight content without removing color segments or hype pieces. I enjoy the technical bits, the hosts hyping things up work well for many viewers, but it can be packaged a lot better, with a lot less of... Overall, I think it's a bit of an unfortunate situation. Both sides of the argument seem to be taking hard stances. There are those that just want all human elements removed, and those that think removing any color and fluff is making a show faceless and a highlights reel. I think the truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. There was an amount of color and fluff that worked before, and it was less than what we have now. And at the same time, it would be a real shame to not let the builders shine and show their personality. Or the hosts, for that matter.
By the way, is this a real job or no?
Yeah, of course it is.
It is?
Of course it is, yes.
Not that tough.
I realize the methodology I use to pinpoint what area is bloated may be flawed. I really should take averages across more episodes and more fights, but as a non-YouTuber, this was already more work than I care to put in for all of probably 5 views. Overall though, I would close by saying that I believe fans, after getting 6 seasons after a hiatus after a decade long, may be a little spoiled. But after low ratings cancelling this high-profile event once, we're wary of it going away again, and probably just want to see what we think is best for the show to keep it going on. Like for me, I've followed since Comedy Central Season 2 while making Lego robots as a kid, then lurked in r/Battlebots for years while following builder channels. As hardcore fans, unfortunately, producers know they have our attention regardless. But we're also at a place where there are alternatives for your pure fight cravings. For example, for a more raw competition-focused event that you can watch, the Norwalk Havoc streams and videos are excellent, and despite not having as much polish, sometimes getting the infographics wrong and such, or the replays not working.
And facing who? Who are they facing? Our graphic still says Ratchet versus Michael the Robot.
Or not having heavyweights, many actually find it more enjoyable than Battlebots, and there's hours and hours of more consistent content. This is just always going to be a pain of following niche interests. When your market alone isn't enough to sustain itself because the market is too small, so the product becomes diluted to appeal to more people. In the heavy metal community, bands are often accused of selling out when adopting a softer, more digestible sound, whereas smaller bands not worry about making it big, just do what they feel is right for them. In the end, I think we should always strive for things to be better, not just accept things because it's what we got. But it's also important to stop and ask, is it really that bad? And if it is, what really is the problem?
Fight! Look at that smirk. What an idiot.